Welcome to History Unraveled. You know, I was thinking about something the other day,
Oh,
and it
yeah.
just kind of hit me. You know how sometimes you have those moments, like late at night,
Mm-hmm.
where you just like have this kind of deep thought, and you're like, whoa,
Yeah, yeah.
what if, like, imagine if you will, okay,
Okay.
a single flame,
Okay.
just a tiny little flame,
Mm-hmm.
and it's licking at the edge of a scroll.
Okay.
And that scroll
Yeah.
just so happens to be the
Ah.
only surviving
Oh,
copy
wow.
of a lost play by
Oh,
Sophocles,
my gosh.
or like a scientific discovery that could have revolutionized
Uh,
medicine, or even just like the personal diary
mm-hmm.
of some long dead philosopher.
Yeah.
And then imagine that flame multiplies 1,000-fold,
Whoa.
consuming an entire library,
Yeah.
a vast repository of human knowledge built over centuries.
Just go.
Just gone poof.
Yeah.
And what if I told you that this isn't just some hypothetical
Right.
thought experiment,
Yeah.
but a very real and hotly debated chapter in human history?
Oh, really?
Today, we're diving deep into the intricate and often misunderstood story
Okay.
of the great Library of Alexandria
Interesting.
and the knowledge that vanished with it. You know, for those of us who just love to learn and, like that thrill of discovering something new,
Mm-hmm.
this is a story that has some crucial lessons to reveal about the value of information
Yeah, for sure.
and the fragility of even the most ambitious attempts to preserve it.
So we are embarking today on a deep dive into the legendary Library of Alexandria,
Okay.
and we're going to be drawing from a bunch of different sources, historical accounts,
Yeah.
and some really great work by modern scholars.
Oh,
Our goal here is to kind of navigate the various theories
Right.
surrounding its founding,
yeah.
its remarkable expansion, the brilliant minds that were
Yeah.
attracted to it, and then the multiple narratives
Yeah.
surrounding its decline and potential destruction.
I mean, it's a story that's captivated people for centuries,
Oh, yeah, for sure.
right? The idea of this lost repository of knowledge.
Right.
So we're not just going to be, rattling off dates
Yeah.
and names.
No.
We're going to really try to extract the core insights,
Okay.
the surprising facts and connections
Mm.
that illuminate what this center of knowledge
Yeah.
really meant to the ancient world
Okay.
and what its loss signifies for us today.
Mm.
And our main source for this exploration
Okay.
is going to be the Wikipedia article on the Library of Alexandria,
Okay. Cool.
which is a really rich compilation of information,
Yes.
historical sources,
Uh-huh.
and contemporary scholarly perspectives.
Great.
So we'll be sifting through all these layers of information
All right.
to bring you the most important aspects of this
Mm-hmm.
enduring historical puzzle.
So when we think about a library dedicated to housing all of human knowledge, it almost sounds like something out of a myth or a legend.
Yeah, it does, right?
But when we dig into the past, we see that this drive to collect and organize information isn't some new idea that popped up in Alexandria.
Right, so it wasn't just some sudden, like, aha moment.
Right.
They were building on something.
Yeah, exactly.
So were there, like, earlier libraries
Yes.
that kind of paved the way for this grand vision in Alexandria?
Absolutely. And it's fascinating when you think about this long arc of human civilization, because various cultures across the ancient world
Uh-huh,
recognize the power of preserving their written records.
right.
I mean, think about the Sumerian archives dating back over 5,000 years.
Wow.
I mean, that's some of the earliest evidence we have of organized information storage.
That's incredible.
It is. And it wasn't just about, taxes and trade.
Right?
By the 3rd millennium BC, we start seeing these scholarly efforts to curate literary texts.
Okay, so they were thinking about preserving their stories,
Yeah.
and their myths, and their
Absolutely, their culture.
culture.
Yeah.
So this urge to safeguard knowledge has been with us for a very long time.
It
What are some other, libraries that really stand out as precursors to Alexandria?
Well, the great empires of the ancient Near East,
Okay.
like the Hittites and the Assyrians,
Hmm.
they amassed these really impressive archives containing documents in multiple languages.
Uh-huh.
And one that really stands out is the Library of Ashurbanipal
Uh-huh.
in Nineveh from the 7th century BC.
Okay.
It's a particularly well-documented example of this kind of undertaking.
Cool. And what about Babylon?
Oh, yeah. Babylon under Nebuchadnezzar II
Okay.
also boasted a substantial library.
Wow. So this was a widespread practice.
It was.
Back then.
Yeah, and even in Greece,
Oh, okay.
before the Hellenistic Age, we
Sure.
have the Athenian tyrant Pisistratus,
Okay.
who is credited with establishing the first major public library
Okay.
in the 6th century BC.
Interesting. So the Library of Alexandria It wasn't an isolated phenomenon. It
Exactly.
was
Yeah.
building on this long tradition.
It was the most ambitious expression of this long-standing cultural value.
Yeah, this idea that knowledge is power. And
Right.
knowledge needs to be preserved.
Absolutely.
So we've got this kind of foundation laid.
Yeah.
And then enter Alexander the Great,
Yeah.
who kind of reshapes the map of the world.
He did, and if we look at this in the bigger picture, after his death in 323 BC, his vast empire
Right.
fractured into several kingdoms, ruled by his generals.
Right.
You have the Antigonids in Greece,
Okay.
the Seleucids in much of Asia, and then, of course, the Ptolemies in Egypt.
Right. And they're the ones who established Alexandria as their capital.
Exactly. And these new Hellenistic rulers,
Okay.
they were eager to project power and legitimacy.
Yeah, makes sense.
And they saw promoting Greek culture and learning as a crucial part of that.
They wanted to be seen as the inheritors of that Greek intellectual tradition.
Precisely. And libraries became very potent symbols of prestige.
Okay.
They attracted intellectuals. They served as practical resources for governance.
Right, because they would have legal texts and all sorts of things.
Exactly. They had legal texts, historical records, even scientific treatises that could help with administration and even military endeavors.
Interesting.
Yeah, and the act of collecting knowledge, both from the Greek world and the older, more established civilizations of the Near East,
Right.
this was a deliberate strategy for these new rulers.
Okay, so it's both a practical and a kind of symbolic thing.
Exactly.
So most major Hellenistic urban centers at this point would have had a royal library.
They would have.
But Alexandria was different.
Yeah, it was.
I mean, it wasn't just another, collection of scrolls.
Right.
What set it apart?
Well, the Library of Alexandria was really groundbreaking in its aspiration. It wasn't just a royal library.
Right.
It was intended to be a universal library.
Wow.
A repository encompassing all known knowledge.
That's a huge goal.
It is a huge goal.
I mean, how do you even begin to imagine collecting everything?
Well, it's a vision on an unprecedented scale.
Yeah.
And a key factor here is Egypt's unique geographical position.
Okay.
They had this ideal climate for cultivating papyrus.
Right, the writing material of the time.
Exactly, an abundant and relatively inexpensive supply of writing material.
Okay, so they had the ambition and they had the resources to make it happen.
Yeah.
So now the question becomes, who gets the credit for actually bringing this to life?
Right.
Was it Ptolemy, the founder of the dynasty?
Yeah.
Or his very ambitious son, Ptolemy II?
Well, this brings us to an interesting historical debate.
Okay.
With some later embellishments, for sure.
Oh?
The earliest account we have of the library's founding comes from the letter of Aristeas, which was written quite a bit later, sometime between 180 and 145 BC.
Okay, so not a contemporary account.
Not a contemporary account.
Okay.
And according to this letter, the initial concept is attributed to Ptolemy Isoter and Demetrius of Phalerum. Is credited as the driving force behind its early organization.
Okay, and who was this Demetrius of Phalerum?
Well, he was a student of Aristotle.
Wow. So a direct link back to Aristotle.
Yeah, it adds a real intellectual pedigree.
Yeah, it does.
To the endeavor.
It's like having, one of the, the Beatles starting a record label or something.
Exactly.
Yeah. So.
Yeah, he was a student of Theophrastus, who was Aristotle's successor at the Lyceum.
Okay.
But we have to take this letter of Aristeas with a grain of salt.
Right. Because it was written later.
Exactly. It's a later source. And there are some historical inaccuracies.
Okay, so it's not the most reliable.
Exactly. And other historical accounts actually suggest that the actual establishment of the library as a functioning institution happened during the reign of Ptolemy II.
Okay, so his son.
His son, exactly.
Okay, so historians are still kind of piecing together
They are.
the exact origins of the library.
And the prevailing scholarly view today is that Ptolemy, I may have had this grand vision. He was a writer of history himself. So he understood the importance of preserving knowledge. He may have initiated some preliminary efforts, but it probably didn't become a physical reality until his son, Ptolemy II.
Okay, and what about Demetrius?
Right. Well, by that time, Demetrius had actually fallen out of favor with the Ptolemaic court.
Oh, so politics got in the way.
Yeah, exactly.
Okay, so it seems less likely that he was directly involved in establishing the fully formed library?
Yeah, probably not. But he could have played a role in acquiring some of those initial texts.
Right, because he had those connections to Aristotle's school.
Exactly. And Stephen V. Tracy argues that it's highly probable that around 295 BC, Demetrius, with his connections to the Peripatetic school, would have been in a unique position to acquire those early manuscripts of Aristotle and Theophrastus.
Okay, so he may not have been the architect of the institution itself.
Yeah.
But he still might have played a crucial role in building that initial collection.
Yeah, it's very possible.
Okay, so the library is starting to take shape.
Yes.
Where was it located in Alexandria?
Well, it was strategically located in the Bruchain, which was the royal quarter of Alexandria.
Okay.
And it was part of a larger research institution known as the Mauserin.
The Mauserin.
Yeah, literally the House of the Muses.
Okay, so it wasn't just the standalone library.
No, it was part of a larger kind of intellectual complex.
Interesting. And what was the purpose?
Well, if you understand the Ptolemaic mindset, their primary purpose was likely to show off the immense wealth and cultural power of Egypt under its new Greek rulers.
So it's like a statement of power.
Yes.
As much as it is a beacon of learning.
Exactly.
Okay.
And while research was definitely conducted there from the beginning, and it played a crucial role, the library also served as this tangible symbol of Ptolemaic ambition and grandeur.
Okay, so it's both.
It's both practical and symbolic.
Yeah, and of course the knowledge contained within provided some practical benefits to the ruling dynasty as well.
I mean, that makes sense.
Yeah.
I mean, knowledge is power.
Exactly.
So what did this House of the Muses actually look like?
Well, precise architectural layout is still debated by scholars.
Okay.
Because we don't have any surviving physical evidence. But we do have these tantalizing glimpses from ancient sources.
Okay, well, paint us a picture.
Okay, imagine a sprawling complex, maybe resembling a grand temple, with these dedicated halls called bibliothecae.
Okay.
Housing countless scrolls organized on shelves.
I mean, it must have been an incredible sight.
It would have been, and these structures would have been adorned with Greek columns.
Okay, so very Hellenistic.
Very Hellenistic, yeah. And they also had a peripotos.
Peripotos.
Yeah, which was a covered walkway.
Okay.
Perfect for intellectual strolls and discussions.
It's like a philosophical promenade. Exactly. Yeah, and a communal dining hall to foster a sense of community.
I like that.
Yeah, and then they had dedicated reading rooms for focused study, meeting rooms for collaborative work, tranquil gardens for contemplation, and even lecture halls.
So they had everything.
They had everything.
It's like the model for a modern university.
It is, in essence.
Yeah.
And one description even mentions an inscription.
Oh, wow.
Above the shelves that proclaimed...
What did it say?
The place of the cure of the soul.
Wow, that's beautiful.
It is a really powerful phrase.
Yeah, it really is.
It speaks volumes about how they viewed knowledge and its potential to heal and elevate the human spirit.
Yeah, it's not just about accumulating facts. It's about something deeper.
Exactly.
So how do they go about building this vast collection?
Right.
We're talking about a repository that was intended to encompass all human knowledge.
It's a huge undertaking.
It's mind-boggling.
Well, the Ptolemaic rulers pursued this goal with remarkable energy and a lot of money.
Okay, so they were willing to invest in it?
They implemented this proactive and well-funded book purchasing policy.
Okay, tell me more about this policy.
Well, they had these royal agents who were entrusted with substantial sums of money, and they were sent out to acquire as many texts as possible.
I mean, were there like ancient book fairs or something?
Well, there were these major centers of learning and literary production, and they would have these book fairs like in Rhodes and Athens.
Okay, so the agents would go there.
Exactly.
And just buy up everything they could find.
Yeah, they had a preference for older copies.
Okay, why older copies?
Well, they believed that those were more likely to be authentic.
Right, less corrupted by errors in copying.
Exactly, like today's collectors seeking out first editions for their purity and historical significance.
I can see the parallel there.
Yeah.
So they're sending agents to these book fairs, but they didn't stop there.
No, they didn't.
How else did they get their hands on these scrolls?
Well, according to Galen, under a decree by Ptolemy II, any books found on ships docking in Alexandria were confiscated.
Whoa, wait, they would just take people's books?
Yeah, they would bring them to the library, have them meticulously copied.
And then what?
They would keep the originals for the library.
And give back the copies.
Yeah, they would return the copies to the ship owners.
That's a pretty bold move.
It is a bold move.
So every ship arriving in Alexandria was a potential source of new acquisitions?
Exactly.
Wow, that's amazing.
They were relentless.
They were serious about this.
They were very serious.
So were there any types of texts that they were particularly interested in?
Well, they placed a special emphasis on acquiring multiple manuscripts of the Homeric poems.
The Iliad and the Odyssey.
Exactly.
Okay, so the foundation of Greek literature.
Exactly. They amassed numerous versions of the Iliad and the Odyssey, and they meticulously annotated them, labeled each copy to indicate its place of origin or the specific recension it represented.
So it wasn't just about the quantity.
Right.
It was about the quality and the scholarly rigor behind the collecting.
Yeah, they were engaged in a very sophisticated level of scholarship.
Okay, so they're gathering these texts from far and wide.
Yeah.
But who were the people who were actually using them?
Well, the Mausoleum wasn't just a storage facility for scrolls. It was designed as this vibrant intellectual hub. A place for scholars, poets, philosophers, researchers.
Like a think tank of the ancient world.
Yes, in many respects it was.
Wow.
And according to Strabo, these individuals, they enjoyed incredibly generous benefits.
Like what kind of benefits are we talking about?
Well, they had a substantial salary. Free food and lodging within the Mausoleum.
Wow.
And they were exempt from various taxes.
So they could just focus on their work.
Exactly.
Yeah.
They lived and worked in close proximity, which fostered a very dynamic and collaborative environment.
It sounds almost utopian.
It does.
So tell me more about what life would have been like.
Okay, well, they had this large circular dining hall with a domed ceiling where they would gather for meals and engage in discussions.
Yeah, just imagine the conversation.
I know. And they had numerous classrooms, lecture halls. And while their primary focus was on research, they were also expected to do some teaching. And there's even speculation that they might have had a zoo.
A zoo.
Yeah, because Ptolemy II was very interested in zoology.
Okay, so they might have had exotic animals.
Yeah, possibly.
For study and observation.
Exactly. And Lionel Casson pointed out that the aim was to really liberate these minds from the mundane concerns of daily life.
Yeah, so they could just focus on knowledge.
Exactly. And Strabo called this group of scholars a synodos.
A synodos.
Yeah, which means community or fellowship.
I like that.
Yeah. And as early as 283 BC, this community may have numbered between 30 and 50 individuals.
Wow. So this is a real, a real group of thinkers coming together.
Yeah.
So what kind of groundbreaking work were these pioneering scholars engaged in?
Well, the Library of Alexandria was different from other centers of learning.
Okay. How so?
Because it wasn't affiliated with a single dominant philosophical school.
Oh, okay. So it wasn't like Plato's Academy or Aristotle's Lyceum.
Exactly. It fostered this remarkable degree of academic freedom.
Okay. So they could pursue whatever interested them.
Yeah, they had a lot of intellectual diversity.
That's cool.
But it's important to remember that this freedom was still subject to the authority of the king.
Right, because it was a royal institution.
Exactly.
Right.
And there's this cautionary tale about a poet named Socrates who wrote some verses mocking Ptolemy II's marriage to his sister.
Oh, wow. That's risky.
It is, yeah. And the story goes that he was imprisoned, escaped, was recaptured.
Oh, no.
Sealed inside a lead jar and thrown into the sea.
That's a harsh punishment.
It is a very harsh punishment.
So even in the sanctuary of thought, the ruler's will was still absolute.
It was.
Okay.
And religiously, the motion was overseen by a priest of the Muses. Appointed by the king.
So there was a religious element to it as well.
Yeah, there was. And the library itself was directed by a head librarian who was also a distinguished scholar and usually served as tutor to the king's son. The first recorded head librarian was Zenodotus of Ephesus.
Okay, and what was he known for?
Well, he was primarily focused on establishing canonical texts for Homer's epics and the works of the early Greek lyric poets.
So he was trying to create definitive versions of these important texts.
Exactly. And much of what we know about his editorial decisions comes from later commentaries that cite his work.
So his work was very influential.
It was very influential.
And it highlights this early emphasis on preserving and standardizing these foundational texts of Greek literature.
Absolutely.
So he's doing this incredible work on Homer and the lyric poets.
Yes.
But he's also credited with another significant innovation.
Oh, yes, he is.
What was that?
Well, he compiled a glossary of rare and unusual words found in Homer and other poets, and he arranged them in alphabetical order.
Wow, alphabetical order.
Yes, well, at least by the first letter.
Oh, okay, so not the full alphabetical order we use today.
Right, but this is the earliest known systematic use of alphabetical order.
That's still a huge deal.
It is a big step forward, and it's likely that he also implemented this system for the library's collection.
Right, because it seems like they were cataloging things alphabetically from a pretty early stage.
Yeah, and it wasn't until the 2nd century A.D. That scholars really started using alphabetical ordering consistently through all the letters.
But still, Zenodotus was ahead of his time.
He was a pioneer in information management.
Yeah, he was.
For sure.
Now, what about the famous catalog of the library?
Oh, yes.
The Penakes of Callimachus.
The Penakes of Callimachus.
I mean, this is one of those things that you just hear about.
Yeah, it's legendary.
Tell us more about it.
Okay, well, it was a monumental scholarly achievement.
Okay.
This was a comprehensive 120-book catalog.
There were 120 books just for the catalog?
Just for the catalog.
Wow.
And it aimed to list every known author and all their works.
I mean, that's incredible.
It is, unfortunately, the complete Penakes hasn't survived.
Oh, no.
But we have references and fragments in later sources that give us a good idea of its structure and scope.
Okay, so what do we know about how it was organized?
Well, it was organized by genre.
Okay.
First dividing things between poetry and prose, and then more specific categories within each.
Okay.
And within each section, authors were listed alphabetically.
Alphabetically by first letter, I assume?
Yes, by first letter.
Right.
And each entry included the author's name, their father's name, their birthplace, a little bit of biographical information, even nicknames sometimes.
That's so cool.
And then a complete list of all their works.
Wow. So for prolific authors, these entries must have been huge.
Oh, yeah. They could span multiple columns on the papyrus scrolls.
So the Penakes, it's more than just a list of titles.
It is.
It's like a window into the whole literary landscape of that era.
Exactly.
It's amazing that they put so much effort into organization and accessibility.
They did. It shows their commitment to knowledge and its dissemination.
And it's fascinating to me that Callimachus himself never became the head librarian.
It is interesting, isn't it?
You would think that the guy who created this incredible catalog would be the natural choice.
Yeah, but he never held that position.
So who were some of the other early scholars who contributed to the library?
Well, there was Hermippus of Smyrna, who specialized in biographies, and Philostephanus of Cyrene, who focused on geography, and Istros, who studied Attic antiquities.
Interesting. So a wide range of interests.
A very wide range.
And we should also remember that alongside the Great Library, other smaller private libraries started popping up in Alexandria.
They did, yeah. It was a real intellectual boom town.
It sounds like it. And there are even connections between the library and some of the famous inventors of the time.
Yes. There's a popular legend that Archimedes, conceived of his famous screw.
The one for raising water.
Exactly, while he was studying at the library.
That's amazing.
It's a great story. Whether it's true or not, we don't know for sure.
Right.
But it shows how the library captured the imagination.
Yeah, it does.
And people.
And after Zenodotus, who was the next head librarian?
Well, the second head librarian, appointed by Ptolemy II, was Apollonius of Rhodes.
Apollonius of Rhodes?
Yes, he was actually a native of Alexandria and a student of Callimachus. And he also tutored Ptolemy's son.
Wow, so a very important position.
He was a very influential figure. And he's best known today as the author of the Argonautica.
The Argonautica.
Yeah, which is an epic poem about Jason and the Argonauts.
Okay, and that survived to this day.
It has.
That's incredible.
It is a great work, and we also have fragments of his scholarly writings.
Oh, wow. So he wasn't just a poet.
No, he was also a scholar.
So the library wasn't just a place for preserving texts.
Right.
It was also a place for creating new works of literature and fostering innovation.
Yeah, it was a real melting pot of ideas.
It was a golden age.
It was a very vibrant time.
So we've got this incredible institution flourishing under the Ptolemies. And then who comes along next?
Well, the third head librarian was Eratosthenes of Cyrene.
Eratosthenes.
Yes. He succeeded Apollonius.
Okay.
And while he's best known for his scientific achievements, he was also a very significant literary scholar. His most important work was the Geographica.
Geographica?
Yeah, a 3-volume treatise on geography.
Okay.
Now, unfortunately, the complete work is lost.
Oh, that's a shame.
It is, but we have fragments and citations in later writers like Strabo.
Okay, so we can still get a sense of its importance.
Yes, we can.
And what was so groundbreaking about his work?
Well, he was the first to apply mathematical principles.
Okay. Expert speaker.